The three suns of Vexthara hung low over the crystalline spires of the Galactic Council's capital, their violet light refracting through the towering structures like a prism of pure arrogance. The air hummed with the faint, self-satisfied thrum of atmospheric stabilizers, ensuring the environment remained perfect, just as the Council preferred. After all, why tolerate discomfort when one ruled the known galaxy? High Counselor Kresmoth adjusted his robes, woven from the silk of the long-extinct Isix moths, a species his ancestors had eradicated for sport, and surveyed the Grand Assembly Hall with all four of his dinner plate-sized eyes. The chamber was a masterpiece of intimidation, walls of polished cryllium, mined from the husks of conquered worlds, pulsed with soft bioluminescence, casting the delegates in an ethereal glow. "Esteemed members of the Council," Kresmoth intoned, his voice resonating with the practiced grandeur of someone who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror for weeks. "Today, we conclude another cycle of our sacred duty, the preservation of galactic order." The Kaith Morans, their crystalline exoskeletons clicking softly, inclined their angular heads. The V-Thuri delegates coiled their tentacles in a gesture of approval, while the Nyxandra's multiple heads bobbed in eerie unison, like puppets on a single string. "And now," Kresmoth continued, his mandibles twitching in amusement, "we come to the final item on today's agenda. A trifling matter, really, but one that must be addressed for the sake of bureaucratic completeness." He paused, savoring the moment. "The classification of Homo sapiens." A wave of derisive laughter echoed through the chamber. Counselor Vexthara of the Nyxandra flicked a dismissive limb. "Must we? Their planet is barely out of its technological infancy. They still burn fossil fuels." "Indeed," Kresmoth purred, "but protocol demands we assess even the most quaint of species before assigning them their proper place." He tapped a clawed digit on the podium, summoning a hologram of Earth, blue, fragile, unremarkable. A Category 7 civilization, at best, barely sentient by our standards. The Kaith Moran delegate, Jeeks, emitted a sound like shattering glass, their version of a chuckle. "The banquet awaits, and I've heard the V-Thuri have prepared a delicacy from their newest colony." Kresmoth was about to call the vote when the chamber doors slid open with a whisper. An attendant, a lesser species with too many limbs and not enough dignity, scurried in. "High Counselor," it stammered, "the human representative has arrived." A hush fell over the assembly. Kresmoth's upper eyes narrowed. "Ah, how punctual of them." He waved a lazy hand. "Bring them in. Let us dispatch this formality with haste." The doors parted again, and Dr. Elias Vance stepped through. He was an unimposing figure, tall for a human perhaps, but dwarfed by the Council's grandeur. His dark suit was simple, his posture relaxed. No ceremonial garb, no ostentatious adornments, just a man, standing calmly amidst a room of beings who considered him little more than an amusing curiosity. Kresmoth's mandibles twitched again. "Ah, the human! How quaint!" He gestured magnanimously. "You may approach." Vance did, his footsteps silent on the cryllium floor. When he reached the center of the chamber, he inclined his head just slightly. Not a bow. Acknowledgement. "High Counselor," Vance said, his voice steady. "Thank you for allowing me to address the Council." Kresmoth leaned forward, relishing the moment. "Speak then, but be brief. We have real matters to attend to." The chamber hummed with condescension. The delegates exchanged glances, already composing their mockery for the post-session feast. Vance smiled. "Just a little," and the storm began. The chamber's ambient glow dimmed as if the very air recoiled from the audacity of a human standing unbowed before the Galactic Council. Dr. Elias Vance, clad in a simple gray suit, no ceremonial silks, no trophies of conquest, adjusted his spectacles with deliberate calm. The delegates' amusement curdled into impatience. 3 minutes, Kresmoth had said. 3 minutes to grovel, to beg for mercy, to confirm their superiority. Vance did none of those things. Esteemed council, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly in the acoustically perfected hall. Humanity thanks you for this opportunity to correct certain misconceptions. His words were polished, his inflection flawless in the guttural clicks of the Nixandra, the harmonic hums of the Kaith Moran. A few tentacles among the V-30 twitched in surprise. Kresmoth's outermost eyes narrowed. You speak our tongues. How quaint. Linguistics is a hobby, Vance replied, smiling. Much like archaeology. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the holoprojector embedded in his sleeve. The council stiffened as shimmering images of Earth's history unfolded above the central dais. The rise and fall of empires, plagues that halved populations, wars that scorched continents. The V-30 delegate there let out a derisive chitter. You showcase your failures as evidence? Vance didn't flinch. Adaptability, counselor. Not failure. The scenes shifted, humanity rebuilding after each catastrophe, forging alliances from ashes, turning starvation into surplus. We call it resilience. A trait your archives suggest the council itself lacks. A ripple passed through the chamber. Kresmoth's primary hands clenched the armrests of his throne. Explain. Vance tilted his head. Curious, isn't it? The great Kaith Moran Purge, the V-30 rebellion of the Twin Stars, all meticulously scrubbed from your official records, yet fragments remain in backup servers. In oral histories, his gaze lingered on the Kaith Moran delegation, their crystalline facets dulling with unease. Tell me, Counselor Vexara, how many Nixandra heads truly voted for the annexation of Prixus? Vexara's central head reared back. You dare. I dare nothing, Vance said softly. I merely read. Silence. Then Kresmoth laughed, a sound like shattering glass. A clever trick, but accessing restricted data is treason. Vance tapped his projector again. A single document glowed, a council decree, signed by Kresmoth himself, authorizing the sterilization of the Yithari homeworld. The Kaith Moran delegate, Anne, rose abruptly, their exoskeleton vibrating with suppressed fury. This was classified. Indeed, Vance said, just like the V-30's voluntary surrender at Deltra IV, the tentacled delegates recoiled as battle logs flashed, V-30 ships crippled not by valor, but by council-engineered viruses. The chamber's arrogance wavered. One Komel and goad. Kresmoth's voice turned lethal. Who gave you this? Vance adjusted his spectacles again. Humanity's other hobby, pattern recognition. Our AI networks have spent decades cross-referencing your archives. Turns out, deleting a file doesn't erase its shadow. He paused. Or its consequences. The Nixandra's multiple heads hissed in unison. The V-30's tentacles coiled like struck serpents. And the Kaith Moran, Anne's facets gleamed with something dangerous. Recognition. Kresmoth stood, his robes hissing against the floor. Enough. Guards. Seize. Wait. Anne's voice cut through the command. They stepped forward, their crystalline form refracting the hologram's light into accusing shards. How much else have you hidden, Kresmoth? Vance didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply stood there, a man in a gray suit, as the Galactic Council's invincibility cracked like thin ice beneath their feet, and the storm, at last, began in earnest. The chamber's air thickened like plasma before a storm. Counselor Vexara of the Nixandra surged forward, all four of her serpentine heads hissing in unison, their jeweled crests flaring. Espionage, she spat, the words slithering through the chamber in 3 different languages. Seize him! Dissect his primitive brain for whatever tricks highs! High Counselor Kresmoth raised a single spindled hand. The guards, their carapace armor glinting under the vaulted lights, froze mid-step. Kresmoth's 4 eyes narrowed, not in alarm but in the slow, indulgent amusement of a predator toying with prey. Let the human finish, he purred, his voice oiled with condescension. I do so enjoy educational demonstrations. Dr. Elias Vance adjusted his glasses, an affectation, the council had assumed, until they realized the lenses were interfaces. His fingers flicked and the holograms shifted. Now they displayed not just Earth's bloody history, but the Galactic Council's own archives, secret treaties scrawled in Keith Moran blood ink, the Thuri labor camps hidden behind falsified trade logs, the Nixandra's systematic purges of their own dissenting broodmates. You see, Vance said, his tone conversational, as if discussing weather patterns, humanity's greatest flaw by your metrics was always our chaos. But chaos has a way of adapting. He tapped his temple. While your scholars dismissed our primitive networks, our AI was learning. Not just your languages, your secrets. A murmur rippled through the delegates. The Keith Morans, their crystalline bodies chiming like disturbed wind chimes, clustered together. One, a junior delegate with fractures along their thorax, old battle scars from a rebellion the council had erased from official record, stepped forward. These files, they rasped, their voice vibrating with barely contained fury, were sealed under penalty of annihilation. Vance nodded. And yet, here they are. Kresmoth's amusement curdled. His robes, woven from the silk of creatures had exterminated for sport, rustled as he leaned forward. You overreach, human. Even if your toys uncovered classified data, what of it? The council's authority is absolute. Our order is necessary. Is it? Vance tilted his head. The holograms dissolved, replaced by a single damning image. Kresmoth himself, in a private chamber, his voice dripping with contempt as he addressed an unseen ally. Let the lesser species squabble over scraps. Their divisions are the foundation of our throne. Then, chaos. The Keith Moran delegation erupted in a cacophony of shattering harmonics. You lied about the purge of Zyrthalis. Their lead delegate roared, their crystalline forms splintering with rage. You told us the V-Thuri bombed our nesting grounds. The V-Thuri, their tentacles lashing, rounded on the Nixandra. And you sold us as chattel to the mining syndicates. Kresmoth's mandibles twitched. Guards. But the guards hesitated. Their loyalty chips hardwired into their neural cores should have compelled instant obedience. Yet one, a grizzled veteran with a missing antenna, glanced at Vance. The humans. AI? They muttered, their voice thick with realization. It's in our systems. It's unlocking things. Vance spread his hands. We didn't come to humiliate you. We came to ask how many of you knew the truth. How many of you were complicit? The chamber fractured along invisible fault lines. The Nixandra's broodheads turned on each other, hissing accusations. The V-Thuri delegates activated their comms, broadcasting the revelations to their homeworlds. And the Keith Morans, their bodies resonating with a frequency that made the crystalline walls tremble, formed a phalanx around Vance. Kresmoth's veneer of control shattered. You insect, he snarled, lunging from his podium. You think this changes anything? The council's fleets will reduce your wretched planet to ash. Vance didn't flinch. Maybe. But first, he nodded to the Keith Moran delegate, who raised a shimmering limb. The holograms flared one last time, flooding every public feed in the galaxy with the council's sins. Somewhere on 1,000 oppressed worlds, rebellions ignited, and in the heart of the crown jewel of the empire, the storm broke. The holographic recording of Kresmoth's voice slithered through the chamber like a blade through silk. The council's power relies on keeping them divided. Let them squabble over scraps. It keeps their eyes off our throats. Silence, then chaos. The Keith Moran delegate, Zilthra, shattered it first. Their crystalline body flared crimson, a color reserved for declarations of war. You erased the Keith Moran genocide from your archives. The accusation cracked like a tectonic plate. Our ancestors' screams were convenient for your narrative, weren't they? Kresmoth's four eyes dilated, his frilled neck scales flattening in alarm. This is doctored. Liar! The V3 ambassador, a coiled mass of iridescent tentacles, surged forward. You promised our colonies autonomy, yet your slavers still drag my people from the methane pits of Yix-9. Their voice was a chorus of hiss, the translator struggling to keep pace with their fury. Vance stood motionless at the epicenter, his hands clasped behind his back. The human's calm was a spark in a room drenched in accelerant. Kresmoth slammed a clawed fist onto the podium. Guards, execute the human and seal this chamber. The armored Vextharan sentinels hesitated. Their grip on their plasma pikes faltered as their helmet feeds flickered. Private channels flooded with the same damning data Vance had unleashed. One guard, his carapace marked with battle scars from a peacekeeping massacre on Lyra 3, stepped back. You knew, the guard growled, his voice modulator cracking with static. You knew what they did to Lyra. Vance didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply tilted his head toward the main display, where real-time feeds from across the galaxy bloomed like supernovae. On the molten forges of Kaith Moor, workers shattered their energy shackles, crystalline fists raised. V3 slave ships veered off course, their navigational AIs hijacked by human-coded viruses. The Nyxandra's lower heads hissed at their primary, demanding answers. Kresmoth's comlink blared, a priority alert from the orbital defense grid. Counselor, the Kaith Moran fleet has breached the quarantine zone. They're broadcasting the archives to every ship in the system. Zilthra bared their serrated mouthparts. You made us ashamed of surviving. No more. The chamber's walls, once impervious, now felt like a cage for the council. Vance finally spoke, soft as a scalpel. You judged humanity for fighting each other, but you missed the lesson. We stop, we adapt, we adapt. We unite. He gestured to the seething room. Your lessers just learned the same trick. Counselor Vexara of the Nyxandra, three heads snapping at each other in panic, shrieked, You planned this! Vance shrugged. We just gave the galaxy a mirror. Then the first explosion rocked the spire. The ceiling's crystalline panels trembled as distant anti-aircraft fire streaked past. The feeds showed rebel ships swarming Vexthara's defensive perimeters, their insignias a patchwork of former vassal states. Kresmoth's roar was half terror, half incredulity. You insects dare! The insects, Vance interrupted, built a hive you never saw coming. A second detonation, closer. The guards, now a ragged line between the council and the enraged delegates, lowered their weapons. The scarred one ripped off his helmet, revealing a face etched with old burns. I'm done holding your leash. Zilthra lunged, not at Vance, but at the podium where Kresmoth cowered. The agenda's changed, Counselor. Item 1. Your resignation. The chamber doors burst open, not with guards, but with a tide of servants, technicians, oppressed species who'd scrubbed the floors and powered the reactors. Their tools were in their hands. Their eyes were on Kresmoth. Vance didn't stay to watch. He strode toward the exit, the crowd parting for him, not out of fear, but something far more dangerous. Behind him, the Galactic Council's last agenda item burned. The crystalline spires of Vexthara, once gleaming with the unshakable pride of the Galactic Council, now flickered like dying stars. The planetary defense grid, seized by rebel factions, pulsed erratically, its golden light casting jagged shadows across the chamber's fractured floor. High Counselor Kresmoth's 4 eyes darted between the exits, his robes of extinct species silk suddenly feeling like a shroud. Guards, he bellowed, his voice cracking, but the guards did not come. Instead, The chamber doors hissed open to reveal not reinforcements, but a tide of low-caste technicians, sanitation workers, and indentured servants, species long deemed inferior by the council's decree. Their hands clutched tools repurposed as weapons, plasma cutters, neural disruptors, even the ceremonial daggers ripped from the walls of their oppressors' halls. At their forefront stood Dr. Elias Vance, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the Kaith Moran delegate, her crystalline exoskeleton humming with restrained fury, leveled a disruptor at Kresmoth's chest. "You!" Kresmoth spat, his mandibles quivering. "You vermin orchestrated this?" Vance tilted his head. "We didn't orchestrate, we just connected people." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the Nyxandra delegation. Their multiple heads bowed in silent calculation. Turns out, oppression makes for excellent networking. A V-Thuri servant, her tentacles coiled around a stolen council scepter, stepped forward. "You told us our ancestors were weak, that we deserved chains." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of centuries of lies unraveling. "But your archives say otherwise." Kresmoth's laugh was a brittle thing. "And what? You think humanity will lead you now?" A species that barely mastered fission when we were already rotting from within, interrupted the Kaith Moran delegate. She tapped a crystalline finger against her disruptor. "Your order was a noose, and today y'all feel its pull." The chamber erupted into motion. Kresmoth lunged for the emergency transmat pad, but a Nyxandra guard, his own guard, blocked his path, all 6 of his heads hissing in unison. "The transmat grid is offline. By our order." Panic flashed across Kresmoth's face. He whirled toward Vance. "You can't possibly control what you've unleashed." "The galaxy will burn," Vance sighed. "That's the thing about fire, Counselor. It doesn't discriminate." He gestured to the hologram still flickering above the central dais. Footage of human cities rebuilding after wars, of strangers sharing food after famine. "We don't want to rule. We just refuse to kneel." A thunderous crack split the air as the chamber's great obsidian doors, symbols of the council's impenetrable authority, shattered under the weight of a rebel artillery strike. Dust rained from the ceiling, and for the first time in millennia, the scent of Vexthara's untamed jungles seeped into the sterile halls of power. Kresmoth stumbled back, his robe snagging on the jagged edge of his toppled throne. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "When the fleets arrive." "Which fleets?" The V-Thuri servant bared her serrated teeth. "The ones whose crews just mutinied? Or the ones bombarding your palaces as we speak?" Then, from the shadows, a Nyxandra delegate stepped forward, her primary head dipping in a gesture of surrender. "We withdraw our allegiance." The other heads murmured agreement. "The council is outdated." Kresmoth's legs gave out. He crumpled onto the dais, his once imposing frame reduced to a shuddering heap. Around him, the chamber's mosaics, depicting the council's glorious conquests, peeled from the walls, their tiles scattering like broken promises. Vance crouched beside him, voice low. "You were right about one thing, though." Kresmoth glared up. "What?" "Today did decide humanity's classification." Vance stood, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Turns out, we're the arbiters." Outside, the first rebel ships breached the atmosphere, their engines painting the sky with streaks of fire. The crown jewel of the Galactic Council had fallen, not to weapons, but to truth. And the last agenda item? It was just getting started. The chamber, once a monument to unshakable authority, had become a crucible of revolution. The air smelled of ionized panic, the scent of ozone mingling with the acrid tang of scorched metal as the planetary defense grid sputtered under rebel control. High Counselor Kresmoth's 4 eyes darted between the flickering holoscreens, displaying the chaos beyond. Vexthara's skyline, once pristine, now pulsed with the fiery trails of descending warships. The crown jewel of the Galactic Council was cracking under the weight of its own hubris. "Dr. Kumpa." Elias Vance stood at the center of the storm, his hands clasped behind his back, as if this were merely another academic debate. The guards who had been poised to drag him to an execution chamber now hesitated, their loyalty fraying like the council's lies. "You dare!" Kresmoth's voice was a blade of venom, but it wavered. His robes, woven from the silk of extinct species, seemed to weigh heavier on his shoulders. Vance tilted his head. "We dared to read, to learn, to remember what you tried to erase." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the Keith Moran delegation, their crystalline exoskeletons humming with suppressed fury. "The galaxy isn't yours to curate anymore." Counselor Vexara of the Nixandra, her three heads twitching in discord, was the first to break. "We withdraw our allegiance," she hissed, her central head swiveling to glare at Kresmoth. "The Nixandra will not drown in your arrogance." The chamber erupted. The Vithuri delegates, their tentacles lashing, slammed their appendages on the table. "Reparations," their speaker thundered. "For the colonies you bled dry." Kresmoth's mandibles clenched. "This is treason." "No," Vance interrupted softly. "This is accountability." He tapped his wristcom, and a final hologram bloomed above them, a live feed of the Vextharan docks where a swarm of rebel ships disgorged armored troops. Among them, humans stood shoulder to shoulder with Keith Moran warriors, their crystalline forms refracting the firelight. The Keith Moran delegate, Zerial, rose, her voice a blade of ice. "Our ancestors were purged for resisting you. Today, we honor them." She turned to Vance. "The Keith Moran Protectorate recognizes humanity's arbitration." Kresmoth lunged for the emergency beacon, but the guards, their loyalty severed, stepped into his path. One, a hulking Vextharan whose carapace bore the scars of a dozen council wars, ripped the beacon from his grasp. "No more lies," the guard rumbled. Outside, the crystalline spires trembled as the planetary shields collapsed entirely. The rebel fleet's cannons painted the sky in streaks of crimson, their targeting arrays locking onto the council's last strongholds. Vance approached Kresmoth, his voice almost gentle. "You built an empire on the idea that some species were meant to rule, but survival isn't about domination, it's about adaptation." He gestured to the feed. "Look at what happens when the inferior stop fighting each other and start fighting you." Kresmoth's legs buckled. His empire was unraveling in real time, not from weapons, but from the one thing the Council had never accounted for: solidarity. 3 hours later, the Galactic Council's emblem was pried from the chamber walls. The rebels, a patchwork alliance of former subjects, drafted a provisional charter on the spot, one that began with humanity's foundational principle: no species shall be sovereign over another. Vance stood at the observation deck, watching the first sunrise of a free Vexthara. Cyril joined him, her crystalline facets catching the light. "You knew this would happen," she said. He smiled. "We hoped." Behind them, the last of the Council's loyalists were led away in restraints. The banquet hall, where Kresmoth had planned to toast humanity's subjugation, now hosted a very different celebration. One where humans, Keith, Moran, Vithuri, and Nixandra raised glasses together. The archives would later mark it as the Vexthara Accords, the day the galaxy's oppressed rewrote history. But in the moment, as the three suns crested the horizon, it was simpler than that. It was justice. And as for the Galactic Council's final agenda item, it had been decided. Humanity wasn't classified. They reclassified everything else. Kresmoth's trial lasted 3 minutes. The former High Counselor stood in the same chamber where he had once dictated the fate of species, now flanked by Vithuri shock troops and Keith Moran sentinels. His 4 eyes darted between the faces of those he had called lesser, now his judges. The verdict was unanimous before the proceedings even began. "You misunderstand," Kresmoth spat, his voice fraying. "Without the Council, the galaxy descends into chaos." Vance, leaning against the prosecutor's rail, merely nodded to the holographic feeds. They displayed 100 worlds. Keith Moran engineers repairing V3 warp drives. Nick Sandra medics tending to human colonists, former slave species drafting trade pacts in languages they'd once been forbidden to speak. Funny, Vance said. Looks like we're managing. The sentence was exile, not to a penal colony, but to a quiet, undefended planet in a neutral system. Let him live, Vance had argued, in the universe had failed to control. As the guards led Kresmoth away, Zyril approached Vance, her crystalline form shimmering with something like amusement. You could have executed him. It would have been just. Vance watched the shuttle carrying Kresmoth shrink into the sky. Justice isn't about vengeance. It's about making sure they see. In the weeks that followed, the Provisional Council formalized the Vexthara Accords, dismantling the old hierarchies. Earth's embassies overflowed with delegates seeking alliances, trade, and, most surprisingly, advice. Humanity's primitive knack for cooperation had become the galaxy's most coveted export. On the anniversary of the Council's fall, Vance returned to the observation deck where he had watched the first free sunrise. The three suns hung low, painting the spires in gold. Ziriel joined him, handing him a glass of something that bubbled like champagne but smelled like stardust. To the agenda item that changed everything, she said. Vance clinked his glass against hers. To the ones who weren't on the list. Below them, the rebuilt capital hummed with voices in 100 tongues, none of them whispering. The archives would call this moment a revolution, a reordering, a miracle. But for the first time in galactic history, the future wasn't being written by the powerful. It was being shared. And as for the last laugh, it belonged to the unclassified.